Namaskar. Today we will be continuing with module 1 on sales and distribution management. Today we shall be speaking about sales management, personal selling and salesmanship. So the topics that we will be covering in this particular lecture are: what is the relationship among sales management, personal selling and salesmanship? What is selling? What is the difference between selling and marketing? What is personal selling? What is salesmanship? And we will also talk about relationships and sales management. So let us first start with the relationship among sales management, personal selling and salesmanship. And while we were doing this, we will first try and explain each of these terms separately. In yesterday's lecture, we have spoken about sales management, where we have said that sales management actually is the direction of the sales force, and it includes amongst its purview the recruitment, selection, training, motivation, compensation, performance appraisal of the salespeople. It includes issues like planning, forecasting, budgeting. It also includes setting up of sales quotas, territory management and so forth. Now, what is personal selling? Personal selling is actually a face-to-face interaction between sellers and prospects. Okay, it is a face-to-face interaction that takes place between two entities. One is a seller and the other is a buyer. This buyer could be a first-time buyer, okay, a prospective buyer, or he could be a buyer who has been buying such products from other sources or other organizations, or he may also be a repeat buyer for the same organization. So what does personal selling involve? It involves educating the prospect or the existing customer about the product or service offering, about the marketing mix, about the 4 Ps, about the different products, the attributes, the benefits, the features, the price, etc. And not only educating him, but also influencing and persuading him, convincing him to enter into a sale or to enter into a transaction. So which would mean closing a sale. It is important to note here, the selling is the tip of the iceberg. What is more broad is the marketing function. So sales here means the art of closing the deal. What are the characteristics of personal selling? So personal selling involves a buyer-seller interaction. It is something which is face to face. Of course, today with the advent of the internet and with the technological advancements, presentations and dialogues also happen online through virtual platforms, through audiovisual media. However, it is an interaction where it is a very interactive relationship, often an immediate and interactive relationship between a buyer and a seller. Because of advancements in technology, these interactions today not only restrict themselves to face, but also take place across states, across countries, across continents, all over the world, where the buyers and sellers may be geographically spread from each other. Second characteristic of personal selling is that it is something which can be customized. It is something which is highly personalized. It is not a monologue like an advertisement. In fact, it is a dialogue which takes place, and keeping in mind the nature of the client or the customer, keeping in mind the customer characteristics, the seller would try to customize his presentation or his dialogue. It involves a personal touch where they both, the buyer and the seller, get in touch with each other, they interact with each other. A two-way dialogue takes place. The seller educates the customers, tries to influence the customer or the prospective customer to enter into a sale, and the buyer or the customer has his own queries, has his own concerns or issues which he needs to discuss, which he does with the seller, and these issues could range from with respect to product or the prices or delivery terms, etc. Often what happens is as a result of this interaction and as a result of the high level of personalization and customization, there is a cultivation of relationships between the buyer and the seller, or between the two entities here. So what it constitutes is essentially a buyer-seller dyad, something which we will be talking of in subsequent sessions. So as the relationships get cultivated, the seller has an immense opportunity, has a big opportunity to convert the dialogue and the into a sale. He also has the opportunity to build and maintain goodwill, develop friendships and long-term relationships with the buyer, which is a prospective buyer or a current buyer. Coming to the third, which is salesmanship. So what is salesmanship? In yesterday's lecture also, we have discussed what salesmanship is. Salesmanship is it's a skill and an art. It is the manner in which a seller is able to influence the prospective buyer or the actual buyer to enter into a sale. This skill or this art is something which really involves, a lot of the credit for this goes to the salesman himself, who through his human skills, through his technical skills, through his conceptual skills, through his listening skills, through his interpersonal skills, is able to enter not only into a dialogue but also cultivate relationships and persuade or convince a prospective buyer to close a deal. So salesmanship is a skill as well as an art. Now going further with respect to the relationship between the buyer and the seller in terms of, and to go further with respect to relationship among sales management, personal selling and salesmanship. So if we see that sales management, personal selling and salesmanship, they are all related. Okay, they all in some way or the other deal with the customer, they deal with the seller, and whether it is the organization which sells or whether it is the market segment which the organization is catering to, the customers which he is catering to, the entire strategy which organizations must formulate to market and sell a product would depend upon the nature and characteristics of the target segment and of the kind of the customer. So the focus, whether it is in sales management or in personal selling or in salesmanship, the focus here is always and always upon the buyer and the seller, and the seller here trying to influence the buyer in some way or the other to enter into a sale. So sales management administers the personal selling effort. Sales management actually administers the personal selling effort, and personal selling effort is actually enacted through salesmanship. So if you see, salesmanship is what works in personal selling, and personal selling is an integral part of sales management. So that is how we see that salesmanship, personal selling and sales management are all related to each other. Okay, now let us further talk about it, about the sales executive and his, the importance of his being able to conduct several activities, play certain roles, use skills to be able to function effectively in the marketplace. Now, sales executive here needs to understand the different activities which he must perform. In the subsequent sessions, we will be talking about the functions of sales executives and sales managers. We will talk about the roles and responsibilities of sales executives and sales managers. We will also talk about the different kinds of skills they must use. So the sales executive here needs to understand the several activities which include salesmanship. Personal selling is of course a much broader concept than salesmanship, and it is an instrument for implementing the marketing programs. It basically involves informing and persuading the actual and the prospective customers to enter into a transaction or to a purchase. And salesmanship is just one part of personal selling. So but it is of utmost importance. It's a skill of successfully persuading people to buy a product or a service, to not only to buy it once but repeatedly, to patronize, to repatronize. It is also the skill of developing long-term relationships with customers. It is also the skill of cultivating relationships, create a good image about himself and about the company, so creating goodwill. So if you see, salesmanship is just a part of personal selling, but it is really, really important. Why? Because it is an art and skill not only to educate, inform and persuade, but also to build relationships, maintain relationships, create goodwill for himself and for the organization, develop trust in the mind of the customer, because if we look at the customer does not, it's seldom that the customer directly deals with the organization and with the top rungs. It is only with the salespeople that customers get in touch and get in contact with. So the salesperson has a huge responsibility to not only earn sales for the company, profits and revenues for the company, but also to do it on a continual basis by winning customer trust, goodwill, reputation for the company, reputation for the brand, develop long-term relationships, and continually satisfy the needs and wants of the target segment. So yeah, so moving further, when we talk about selling, so what is selling? Selling is actually it is the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg, as we say, is the marketing function. What it's actually observed is the transaction, transaction that takes place between the buyer and the seller. It's a physical activity. So selling is the transaction or the physical activity wherein the buyer or the prospective buyer enters into a transaction with the seller, and the buyer or the prospective buyer actually realizes the value proposition offered by the seller or by the organization, and he agrees to buying a particular product at a particular price from a particular place, and with it's often with even addition of terms and conditions, and especially in the case of a B2B scenario. So the buyer here is convinced of the credibility or of the value proposition offered by the seller, and he enters into a transaction. What takes place is an exchange process. Both the parties have something valuable to offer to each other. The buyer has a need or want, and the seller, and of course, and he has the money or he has the resources to actually purchase a product or a service which will help him meet the need or the want. The seller, on the other hand, promises a value proposition, a good or a service, or the various kind of entities which he in the form of ideas or properties or information or other services, etc., which he feels is going to help satisfy the needs and wants of the customer. So it's a win-win situation for both. Both parties have something valuable to offer to each other. The buyer has a need or want and the financial resources to actually buy products or services which will help him meet that need and want. The seller has something valuable to offer in the form of the value proposition, in the form of the good or service, which will provide a benefit which will help meet the need and want. And both parties negotiate with each other. Negotiation, of course, becomes more important in the case of a B2B scenario. Okay, and or in the case of B2C, also we see some kind of a negotiation or bargaining happening with certain kinds of products. And once both the parties agree on the prices, on the terms of delivery, and they transact with each other, and this is what is selling. So selling is the art of closing a particular deal. In fact, selling is what is going to convert the product that has been manufactured into a cash or into money. And selling in that way, because it is, as we said, is the tip of the iceberg, it is just one of the components of the marketing function amongst others, the others being marketing research, advertising, promotion, and customer relationships, etc. So if we go a little more, and we will see how selling is just a small part of marketing, while selling in the case of selling, so we will differentiate between selling and marketing. In the case of selling, the priority is on the product, but in the case of marketing, the priority is on consumer needs and wants. So it is selling would just take into account conversion of what is produced into cash, but marketing would actually take into account to produce such goods and services which would help meet needs and wants. In the case of selling, company would manufacture a product and sell the product in the market. However, in the marketing role, the company would first decide to study the market and determine the needs and wants of the customer, and then decide on what kind of product or service to be produced, which will help meet the needs and wants. So, in the case of marketing, it is often a huge focus is given by companies on innovation, but in the case of selling, it would not only, it is often existing technologies which are given more priority, and the focus is on reducing the cost of production, the cost of operations. So, in selling, it is the cost which determines the final price, but in the case of marketing, it is the consumers who determine the price, and the price determines the cost. So, it is a different, absolutely a different orientation. In the case of selling, it becomes more of an inside out perspective, but in the case of marketing, it is an outside in perspective. So, in selling, it views business as something which is a goods producing process, but in the case of marketing, it is very broad. It is more to do with a consumer satisfying process. So, that is why the selling concept in the 1950s gave way to the marketing concept, and where the customer became the core, he became the king. And we have discussed this yesterday also in the first lecture. So, if we go, if we look at this table here, we would see that in the case of selling, it is more to do with the selling part or the transacting part, but in the case of marketing, it is more to do with the identifying the needs and wants and delivering the desired satisfaction effectively and efficiently, taking into account consumers' needs and wants, taking into account social and ethical concerns, taking into account environmental issues. So, marketing is much broader in outlook, and in today's day and age, selling is just regarded as a small part of marketing. So, this is the difference between the two of them. Now, coming to a difference in salesperson's approaches also, because if we look at the approach here between and see the difference between selling and marketing, there is also a similar difference which we see in the orientation or in the perspective with respect to a salesperson's roles, responsibilities and functions which they performed during the selling concept and during the marketing concept, and in today's day and era of customization or even high level of individualized marketing. So, a traditional salesperson who in today's day and age also you will find them, as I said yesterday, that for certain kinds of products you do have a transactional selling. So, in where a product is sold to a customer once and he is not contacted again. So, in such approaches where there is a transactional approach to selling, traditional salespeople and their their way of functioning still holds practice. So, they are generally guided by self-interests. They look for money, which is a major motivator, and they seek self-recognition. They take a huge sense of pride in what they do. But professional salespeople, they take care of the customers, which is more to do with the marketing concept. They take care of the customers, both prospective customers and existing customers or actual customers. They look into trying to develop relationship with existing customers to keep them happy, so that the customer continually patronizes them, buys, rebuys, etc. And they also take care of the future needs of such customers. On the other hand, with respect to prospective customers, the professional salesperson would try and offer such products and services as solutions which will help them meet the needs and wants of prospective customers. So, money is a motivator, but not the whole of it, and it is customer interest, whether it is interest of the actual customers or of the potential customers, which is given a huge amount of importance. But if you look at in today's day and era, we would refer to the style as a golden rule salesperson, where they find others' interest more important, and these others' interests not just lie with interests of the customer, but also of other stakeholders, be it channel members, be it facilitators, like warehouses, logistics and service providers, or bankers and insurers, the society, the environment, and they basically share their success and recognition with others in the sales team. The sales team here may be a team with diverse skill sets, diverse knowledge base. Often we refer to them as cross-functional teams, and where complementarity of skills between the team members gives them a synergetic advantage. So such salespeople, they share their success with others, they share their recognition with others. Service is a very important motivator in terms of providing continual support and assistance to the customers, and rewards are shared between the group members or between the team members. So the golden rule here is not only to look for your own interests, but also to look at the interests of the company, of the various stakeholders, and the objective here is something which is very, very long term. It's not a short term objective of just profit or sale, but it's a long term objective of lifetime value, of lifetime relationships, and continual business growth. Now let us come to the different types of sales jobs. Now let's first start with the retail store, where we have the different retailers who sell a final product to the customers for personal and non-business consumption. So these retailers are channel members, they are channel partners, and today we have both organized and unorganized forms of retail. Of course, the local kirana wala is also a salesperson and he has his own sales team, and the organized retail formats, whether it is store or non-store formats, they also have their sales team. So this is one where the sale is made to the end consumer for his personal non-business use. Second is direct, where the company directly gets in touch with the customer or with the prospective customers, and we also refer to it as a zero level or a direct marketing, where there are no channel intermediaries or no channel partners. So in this case, the company has its own sales force which deals with the customers and enters into transaction with them. Today companies also have their websites where customers can ask for help or post queries, or even seek requests, make requests for product demonstrations, etc. And the company sales team or the sales force gets in touch with the customers, whether B2B or whether B2C, whatever the scenario may be, and arranges for this. In fact, in this case, direct sales are made between the marketer and or between the business organization and the end customer, or even in the B2B customer. Third is what we refer to as wholesalers. Now wholesalers here are again another channel partner or another channel member, where they buy in bulk from the manufacturer, they break bulk, they have a huge, they are specialized in the product assortment that they carry, they buy in bulk, they break bulk, and they distribute smaller consignments as per requirements of the various retailers. The wholesaler would supply the consignments to the various retailers across the city or across the region. And of course, you have manufacturers, as we said, who again sell directly to the end customer or to the B2B. So manufacturers could sell both to B2B as well as to B2C. Now we are talking about B2B and B2C, but there is also the government and the institutional buying, where the sales team of the manufacturer or the company's sales force deals with them. We shall talk about it a little later. So we have already discussed personal selling, but just a little more, that it's a personal communication of information, it is persuading, act of persuasion, and through personal selling, the marketer tries to, or the salesperson tries to provide goods, services, information, ideas to the customer to help him meet his need or a want. So what are the different kinds of personal selling? We will first talk about industrial selling or B2B selling. Here the sales takes place to the resellers or to business users, or even as institutional selling or to government. So there are manufacturers who sell their products or services to resellers. Resellers here being wholesalers or retailers or brokers or commission agents, and then they could also be selling to business users, which is typically one or business organization selling a product or a service to another business organization. As a B2B scenario. Institutional selling is when schools, colleges, hospitals, they are the customers, or they are the clients, and they buy in bulk from the manufacturer. So the kind of products which are designed could be customized as per the needs of the institutional client. The prices or the price structure, the discounts, the allowances, the delivery terms, the payment terms would also vary, and the manner in which the product is delivered to the institutional buyer would also differ as compared to to other resellers like wholesalers and retailers. Companies also sell to governments. So there is the railways, or there is the postal department, or there are government hospitals, or there are the defense. So there are business organizations which sell directly to the government and to government organizations, where again the products, the manner in which the product is designed or delivered or priced, or in terms of with respect to delivery terms or payment terms or after sales agreements, etc., would be very, very different as with respect to what is done with resellers. So this is what we have as a B2B selling. We also have something called retail selling, which we just a little discussed a few minutes ago, where you are selling to the end consumer for his personal consumption and non-business use. And then you have services selling, which is it's a very challenging task, where the company sells the product, but a major part of the product is a service. So if we have to see, we realize often that there is a difference between a good and a service. Now not all goods may be pure goods, or not all services may be pure services, because except for some goods there is an element of service associated with a transaction or with a purchase. Similarly, it's a very few purchases where the purchases are pure service purchases, and then there is always a product which is associated with the service. So in any case, service selling here involves providing those additional services, and very often these services being the major constituent or major part of the product. So it's a big challenging task because of the nature or because of the characteristics of services. Services are highly intangible, they cannot be touched and felt. They acts of performance which can only be experienced after the service has been provided. And so there are issues with respect to evaluation between brands in terms of quality. Consumers are always very skeptical because of this characteristics of intangibility. Similarly, services are very heterogeneous in nature, they are not homogeneous. A service provided by two service providers from the same organization, or two salespeople from the same organization may be different. Similarly, one salesperson providing services at two different times, the service ultimately may be very different. Also, services cannot be stored, production and consumption takes place simultaneously. So the issues with respect to matching the demand with the supply is something which is of prime concern. So personal selling here, if we separate relationship marketing and personal selling. Personal selling builds relationships, and there are two main functions here of personal selling, which is revenue generation or generation of revenue, and on a continual basis, and also providing services to satisfy the customers again and again. So emphasis is also on not only existing but major emphasis on prospective customers, because they are to be informed, educated and persuaded into buying and then continually buying. So salesmanship, as we said, is an aspect of personal selling. It is educating and influencing customers, both prospective customers and actual customers, to buy, to rebuy, to patronize, to repatronize, and goodwill. And salesmanship basically it becomes a seller-initiated effort which motivates prospective buyers to decide in favor of the seller's product or service offering. So salesmanship is an art, it is a skill, it is a seller-initiated effort. And the objective here is to enter into a sale, build customer trust and confidence, develop satisfaction, and ultimately build long-term relationships. A little more on the taxonomy and in personal selling and salesmanship. So if we talk about the salesman, we will see, as we spoke about it earlier also, when we talked about the retail or the direct or the indirect or the reseller, different kinds of salespeople. We also spoke about the manufacturer having a sales force, or the retail store having a sales force, or direct marketing and selling which occurs. So if even through virtual platforms. So if we talk a little on the taxonomy, we see that we could actually talk of we could classify them as order takers, order creators, or order getters. So what are order takers? Order takers are those who already have a set of committed salespersons. Very often they have entered into an arrangement before, and the job of the salesperson is to deliver the product or service to the customer as per requirements, could be every day or every week and so forth. So for example, the newspaper wala who comes to your house every day, or the milkman who comes to your house every day, they are already catering to you as committed customers. So order takers here could be of three kinds: inside order takers, delivery salesperson, and outside order takers. So what are inside order takers? Inside order takers are those who await you and you enter the store and ask for a particular product and they give it to you. Delivery salespersons are your milkman and your newspaper wala, and outside order takers are those who probably are ready to welcome you to a store. They are a little more forthright in their approach, they are more active, and will kind of convince you to enter into their store and ask for certain things. Then we have the order creators. Order creators are missionary salespeople. We also refer to them as missionary salespeople. They educate the customers, but they do not close a sale. Their objective is just to persuade a customer to promote the brand. So you have the medical representatives who visit the doctor and talk about their medicine or their the chemical composition of a medicine, and they talk about the benefits of that, and they educate the doctor so that the doctor prescribes it to the patients. Or you also have the book publishers and sellers who visit the professors and they promote their book, and they ask the professors to recommend or to suggest their books as textbooks or reference books. So these are order, and so convince students to buy. So these are order creators. And then you have the order getters. Order getters could be frontline salespeople who go door to door to sell products. Okay, they could be also new business salespeople who persuade prospective customers to buy products. These we also organizational salespeople, the B2B sellers, who try to develop and nurture long-term relationships with their buyers, where team selling or cross-functional sales team efforts are really helpful. And then you have consumer salespeople who are door-to-door salespeople that sell products for personal consumption. Apart from the frontline salespeople, you also have the sales support salespeople who provide support to the front line. So as the name goes, the sales support salespeople, they provide help and assistance to frontline salespeople. These again could be of two kinds: technical support salespeople and merchandisers. Technical support salespeople support the frontline salespeople with the product which is technically complex, and also in cases of negotiations, etc. And merchandisers are those who provide sales support in the case of wholesaling and retailing. So with this we come to an end of this lecture. So the references are still Kandev, Govoni, Puri, which is Sales and Distribution Management, Pearson Education; Havaldar and Kawale, Sales and Distribution Management, Tata McGraw-Hill; Panda and Sevdev, Sales and Distribution Management, Oxford University Press; and Futrell, which is Fundamentals of Selling, which is McGraw-Hill Company. This brings us to an end of the second lecture on Introduction to Sales Management. We hope you found it enjoyable and useful. Thank you.